Greetings and peace, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Tonight, I have the honor and privilege of being joined by my Sheikh and Murshid, Sheikh Wahid Azal of the Fatimiyya Sufi order, and my dear brother and a Sheikh from New York, Brother Sharif Anael Bey. And tonight, my brothers and sisters, we have two worlds colliding, Sufi and Moorish science coming together on the aspects of addressing critical race theory. So I'm honored and I'm humbled that both of these great sheikhs and murshids have joined me in this great podcast. And we begin this in the name of Allah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the beneficent, the most merciful. And without further ado, my blessings and my peace and greetings to both sheikhs to do what they do best.
Nur alaikum and Islam to my brothers and sisters in the Moorish Science Temple. You guys are great. I love you all, one and all. This is great. You know, I think we're going to move some mountains and maybe crush a few tonight.
There you go. Yes, sir. Assalamu alaikum. To you, brother. And I'm honored. I'm truly honored to be a part of this conversation and to be in the presence of both of you. As the brother that I like to do the same, and begin in the name of Allah, the author, the creator, the governor of all the worlds, almighty, eternal, and incomprehensible. I want to give honors to, our prophet in this day and time, sent to our people here in America to teach us the truth about our nationality and birthrights. And that's Prophet Ali. And we give honors to all true and divine prophets, all of them, making no distinction between the prophets. Praise Allah.
Praise Allah. Can you see me, or is my video not on?
I can't see you.
Okay, let's.
Do you have the turn video on option, Sheikh?
Yeah, I think so. Should be there. Integrated camera, video settings. Very strange. This hasn't happened to me before.
Yeah, but that's fine. We can begin this conversation on critical race theory.
Okay.
So I would like for Brother Sharif to start with the critical race theory, his opinions and thoughts on it with the Moorish science perspective. And then we go to Sheikh Wahid Azal.
Well, one of the things that I'll be short and just very simple. The whole big bluster about critical race theory being taught in schools in America, it's a crazy false flag. It's first and foremost, critical race theory is an upper level collegiate course. It is not synonymous with Black history. Critical race theory, in short, is a sociological study of how racism may or may not be institutionalized within American society. That's never been taught at the elementary school level. Never. And so what you have is, the radical alternative right using the term, as a big gigantic and make it into a big gigantic boogeyman. And then putting so much fervor and energy behind it that people end up defending something they don't even need to defend. So you got people saying, no, we do need it in schools. Wait, whoa. Stop. The big thing about propaganda is, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, the big thing about propaganda is that it doesn't have to make sense. All it's got to do is just wear out the opponent. And that's what we're dealing with right now. Oh, last thing I'll say is that we have to be intelligent enough and level-headed enough to be able to put our finger squarely on the pulse of the issue.
Definitely. And Sheikh, please.
Bismillah al-Aqdas, in the name of God, the most impregnable, the most holy. I did a very short podcast last June in 2021, just going over basics of CRT, critical race theory. So if you could put that in the description box, I think that would kind of help people to understand what the theory of critical race is all about. Because whether we're talking about the punditry on the media level or whether we're talking about people on the street, most people have no idea what critical race theory even is, and especially those who are pontificating about it on, the right-wing press, and even some in the liberal press.
Yes.
Critical race theory has to do with, first of all, let's kind of rewind. What is critical race theory? Critical race theory is basically a theory about jurisprudence and race. That certain Marxist legal scholars, beginning in Harvard University in the early 80s, began to write about, mainly Black scholars, where they took much of the critical theory of the time, and especially from the works of Frantz Fanon and otherwise, and began to apply these things to the study of law and how legal, whether we're talking about the legislative level or even on the level of jurisprudence and case laws, whatnot, in the courts, that the system was systemically implementing white supremacy, right?
Correct.
Now, historically speaking, I don't think there's anyone with even a modicum of brain matter in their head that can dispute this fact. Yet, in the right-wing media, whether we're talking about the Murdochracy or whether we're talking about some of its spawns like Sky News here, these people seem to be under the impression that critical race theory is advocating for something that it isn't. And one thing that I covered in that podcast is that one thing that critical race theory is very, very careful about is not to define two things. Number one, race, and number two, white racism. Why? Because under the theory of critical race theory, it doesn't subscribe to notions of essentialism. So to make definitions of race is to fall into essentialist fallacies. And this is what the media doesn't understand. And especially a lot of the right-wing punditry cannot even get their head around this. So they attack a theory which they have no idea about and are demonizing it far and wide, basically because critical race theory has become an extremely disruptive theory to notions of white supremacy, whether masquerading in one form or another, whether hidden or apparent. I'm not saying that critical race theory is an infallible theory of explaining everything. Right. It is certainly not that at all. And there are multiple critical race theories. So for every advocate of critical race theory, they have their own unique perspective of what critical race theory is. They differ amongst each other on details and minutia and this, that, and the other thing, as happens amongst academics and scholars. So even to speak of a critical race theory in the singular is a kind of a fallacy. I personally follow the perspective of my late friend, the Jamaican scholar, Charles W. Mills, God rest his soul. He passed away last year. Him and I started talking with each other over email beginning in 2013 after I read his book, The Racial Contract, for the first time. And this book just blew me away because the way that he has contextualized the issue of race in the modern West is an extremely, extremely important contextualization. He begins on the basis of looking at and dissecting contract theory. So contract theory and social contract theory, which is the basis of the ideology of liberal democracy.
That's right.
Which people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the French enlightened philosopher, basically present, is that society, a society or a polity is formed by the consensus of its subjects. Yes. Whether we're talking about a sovereign in terms of a king, or whether we're talking about a polity in terms of a republic or whatever. So that is the basis of liberal democracy. It's the social contract theory. What Charles Mills does in his book is he completely upends the entire notion of social contract theory by claiming that the social contract, as presented by liberal democratic theory, is actually false. It's a ruse, because the actual contract that has been in place, particularly since the foundation of America, has been a racial contract.
That's fact.
Now, unlike a constitution, a racial contract doesn't necessarily have to be written down in a piece of paper and assented to and signed by other people. It is a functioning contract, just in the same way that, for example, the British have a developing constitution rather than a singular constitution. That is exactly how the racial contract operates in the Western societies, and particularly in the Anglo-Saxon societies. What he also presents that I find extremely interesting, that you actually Anael, touched on in your interview with that lady from Indiana, which is a very important point, is that Charles argues in his book that women, the white woman, is actually a subordinate party to this racial contract.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that in many ways, she is also a victim of this racial contract. And he goes on to define what that racial contract represents as its primary subject. And the primary subject of the racial contract is none other than the white propertied male. So the racial contract is essentially animated by white male patriarchy. That's basically that's basically what it is.
That's so powerful. Thank you for that, dear brother. We, and especially now, this is where the doctrine of Prophet Noble Drew Ali starts to come in as well. What you said about, the race social contract being an implied contract, not something written down, and that, and that is, and the whole idea of using the term developing, that's so crucial, because whiteness defies a solid definition.
Exactly. And this is what Mills gets into in his book, where he, basically says that the whole whiteness paradigm is a constructed paradigm. He gives historical examples that up until maybe about 70, 80 years ago, just right after the post-war period, Irish, Italians, Iberians, Greeks were not considered to be white. So
that's a fact.
So what was white in that previous period was Anglo-Germanic people.
There you go.
Scandinavians, Germans, to some degree the French, but definitely the British and Scots and the Celts.
Correct. It was the whole WASP thing, right? That was whiteness, and at that time. And then so you got with what Prophet Drew Ali teaches, and the American Anthropological Association wholeheartedly agrees with that. They've got tons of white paper on it. That especially and most significantly, their response to Federal Directive 15 that they wrote back in 1997. And so they literally state that the color code system of race is a caste system operating out in the open.
180%. That's what it is. It is a caste system, so which basically shows that all this talk about equality and equity under law and all that kind of stuff is nonsense. And that what we're dealing with, and he kind of touches on this, and other people then get into this, is that what the racial contract represents is the paradigm of colonial settlerism. So
there you go.
Without colonial settlerism, we don't have white supremacy. Even though racism, maybe as a paradigm, can exist in various societies as it has, but white supremacy, qua white supremacy, can only exist in the face of settler colonialism, which begins with the Americas, first under Spanish, then the Portuguese, and then eventually the Anglo-Saxons and the French, and then extends itself across the planet into Australia, Australasia, and so on and so forth.
Right. I'd like to read something really quick that is a part of what the American Anthropological Association had to say about Federal Directive 15. And then I'll explain more detail, especially for the listeners, what Federal Directive 15 actually is. Let me just say this really quick. Federal Directive 15 is the federal government, comes from the federal government's Office of Management and Budget. And it's for race and ethnic standards for federal statistics and administrative reporting in this government. That's what it is, right? And so, real quick, I'll do it backwards. I'll explain a couple things. As a matter of fact, I'll explain, as codified by Federal Directive 15, the solid pillars that hold the caste system in place, black and white. Those are the unchangeables. And then you have the fluid, non-white categories, where you may become white, depending on certain circumstances, right? So here's the definition for black. Black, a person having origins in any of the black racial groups of Africa. We learned in elementary school that you cannot use the word you're defining in your definition. So that's a non-definition. White, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, North Africa, or the Middle East. This is in, can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. So, those are that is the standard. That sets the social, that is the codification in America for the social standard that you spoke of the social contract, the racial contract.
Yes.
The open caste system. Now, this is what federal, some of what the American Anthropological Association had to say about it. Federal Directive 15 itself noted the absence of scientific or anthropological foundations in its formulation. So the directive itself admits that it is not scientific. Federal Directive did not explain what was meant by racial origin, right? The guidelines noted too that, quote, the racial and ethnic categories set forth in the standards should not be interpreted as being primarily biological or genetic in reference. It's bad sociology. That's what it is. And then the last thing I'll read. Knowing the history, and this is to your point, dear brother, knowing the history of how these groups, Italians, Irish, Germans, etc., became white is an integral part of how race and ethnicity are conceptualized in contemporary America. The aggregated category of white begs scrutiny. It is important to keep in mind that the American system of categorizing groups of people based on race and ethnicity developed initially by a then dominant white European descendant population, served as a means to distinguish and control other non-white populations in various ways.
That's exactly it. That is exactly the truth. And I'm glad, my brother, that you pointed that out, because in this caste system that we see, I also see many of those from elite Arab backgrounds who have integrated here in America into white society. And I always notice, like, what is it that sets them apart from like your average other, like you said, the two pillars. If they're fluid enough, they can integrate with one of the other. So right. I've seen that with a lot of prominent Arab individuals here in the States who have basically integrated themselves successfully into the white culture, where they're not seen as an outsider, and yes, they're able to gain all of the accolades and success, which would otherwise seem impossible. So that is a very good point that you pointed out.
There's a gentleman. I'm sorry. Go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
No, go. Okay, thanks. Frantz Fanon wrote a whole book about this whole phenomenon called Black Skin, White Masks.
Yes.
Which is basically the phenomena of Uncle Thomism. And you get this, especially in immigrant communities. I mean, the Iranian American community is, in my opinion, because I come from that community, yes, is a paragon of this, especially the Shahs of Sunset folks in Los Angeles. And this is a function of the assimilationism that colonial settlers and white supremacy imposes on certain populations who are not white in origination. And this also speaks to the larger narrative of colonialism, which unfortunately many contemporary critical race theories are not really taking on board, because critical race theory, other than Charles, has a very Amerocentric perspective on the question of race. Yes. But once you incorporate colonial theory and decolonial theory into the equation, you begin to see how the dynamic operates. So, you have a society that is projecting an image of what is good and what is bad in one perspective. People on the average, on the basic level of a society, want to quote unquote succeed, whatever that means. So what they do, you have a peer pressure, as it will, but on a collective level for conformity, to this white paradigm. And unless you're switched on, or unless you go through hard knocks and experience what the other side looks like, you have no conception of what this dynamic is really all about.
That's right.
And in America, and actually in all Anglo-Saxon societies, whether it's the US, Canada, UK, and here in Australia, it's the same thing that is going on, right? And so this is the function of the colonial settler, because the colonial settler state has to define itself constantly in juxtaposition to an other. Joseph Massad wrote an excellent book that came out back in 2015 entitled Islam in Liberalism, where he traces the entire trajectory of liberal political theory and who liberal political theory is beginning, even before Rousseau. He starts with Voltaire. Begin to find the other. their typification of the what reason was embodied in their opinion in the white race, and particularly Northern Europeans, and their typification of what is completely the opposite of this was the Muslim. So this whole book, Islam in Liberalism, is quite an interesting title because it gives you the entire story of what he's putting in that book. That liberalism could even emerge without having this demonization of a fictitious other in the form of the Muslim.
That's so powerful. And see, oh man, wow, you said so much in that, right? I'll start with in response with the very living example of one of the things you said, a gentleman by the name of Mustafa Hefni. Back in the 80s, Mustafa Hefni immigrated from Egypt. He's an Egyptian-born Arab. Phenotypically, in terms of, appearance, he looks like me. Woolly hair, dark brown, dark olive skin. So he immigrates here, but because based on Federal Directive 15, he's classified as white. After spending time here, he was a professor, I believe, at Temple University. He went to change his classification. That's when all hell broke loose. Wow. That's when they told him, they said, listen, keep your mouth shut. If you might lose your job, you were going to make things real difficult for you. Like really, things got really bad. He's like, no, I'm black, like the people that I look like. And here, that's why they were like, no. So he ran headlong into that whole issue. You see, and so I believe he's suing the federal government, for suing the federal government for quote unquote black status. Now, the whole thing when you touched on otherness, that as you said, and I'm repeating that, the whole otherness juxtaposition is what validates whiteness, and then whiteness masquerades as normality.
Exactly. And there's a reason for this that we can then now kind of bring in the wider economic system. So whiteness under capitalism is unspokenly defined as that which is a good product, right? So let's talk in the language of commodity. So white is a good commodity, black is a bad commodity in the mentality or the zeitgeist of capitalism. So in order to sell, you must become whitened. Right? So definitions of success are then defined in terms of commodification, what you can sell and what you can't sell.
There you go.
Now then we have race and class beginning to merge into a paradigm. As a singular thing. And this is, thankfully, a lot of the critical race theories are also looking at this, how the intersection between class and race is a very important issue to try to unravel much of this. But that materialist mentality that under capitalism is what propels a lot of this stuff. Now, that's not to say that under society or pre-capitalist society, mercantile societies, or even under various facets of the Muslim empire, you didn't have these sorts of attitudes about what is good and bad. That black represents bad and white represents good. You had that. But under capitalism, especially as it begins to morph into the system that we have today around the late 16th century, early 17th century, these become more concretized.
That's a fact. As a matter of fact, that's a perfect segue. I put in our chat earlier, a research paper, and there's a number of similar papers that are out about American racist thought and the Iberian origins of American racist thought. Simply put, and as taught in the Moorish Science Temple of America, right? That time period is the missing link, right? With the people that are now called Negro, Black, Colored, African American, etc. That's our historical missing link, is that time period is the fall of Granada. And slavery not being our beginnings as in the sense of products of European commerce, but slavery being a consequence of our loss. See? It being a consequence of our loss, And today's, these labels that are attached to us, these racial labels, are residual of or socialized, fully American socialized military conceits of a military conflict. It's like, one of the ways we explain it in the organization is like this. Imagine Vietnam War. What did the American troops call the Viet Cong? Gooks, zipperheads, etc. Fast forward to 2022. Imagine a Vietnamese American going to apply for a job, and in one of the boxes says, check one, gook, check another one, zipperhead. And this is what we're dealing with. This is what we're dealing with. And so, we recognizing that the racial color code system of race classification is a caste system, right? Noble Ali's teaching is that, I'll quote him, he said, the time has come when every nation must worship under its own God and victory, and every tongue must confess its own. Core American values, right? The new world idea is that one nation can be formed from many people that have an old world connection. You see? So it has nothing to do with race. The whole racial thing hijacked it. It hijacked it.
Let's look at where the history of the concept of race actually emerges. It actually emerges, it was already moving in that direction, but we don't get a concept of biological race until Charles Darwin and Darwinism.
There you go.
So the notion of race is an Anglo-European scientific positivistic construction in order to justify, right?
Yes.
It's then conquest of the planet, and its belief in its its supremacy over other people, which is what Charles Darwin was a complete racist.
Yes.
There's no question about that. The details of his theory to this day are being unpacked and being revealed, not only for their grave racial overtones and undertones, but also for their unscientific basis. But what you touched on, I want to actually address what you touched about the Iberian roots,
yes, sir,
of racism and white supremacy. The Catholic Church is very much the progenitor or the proto-progenitor of contemporary notions of race and particularly white supremacy.
Correct.
And the reason for that was a connivance, basically because once Columbus had sailed into Hispaniola and began to settle these Spanish on these islands, the church required a justification. And its justification is that these people that they had encountered were quote unquote heathens.
That's right.
So heathens had to be converted or die. So in essence, just like that article that you sent me, I actually read the whole thing.
Nice.
On that basis, the church was actually articulating a holy war in its own conception against these natives that it had conquered, simultaneously to the fact that the church, or these principalities such as the House of Aragon, who had just reconquered Spain, had to have a justification for their dispossession and disenfranchisement of the Moorish populations that had been living there, and they were then at that time under the office of the Grand Inquisition were forcing to convert by force to Roman Catholicism or be killed.
This is the fact.
Simultaneous to that, you have trade happening between Spain and North Africa. And the church needed a justification for its relations with the African population of the continent. So then they then subsumed the Black African population of that continent into that very definition simultaneously as well. So this was all a connivance of the Roman Catholic Church in order to justify its quote unquote holy war. Then under that umbrella, its conquest of new lands.
That's a fact. To your point, back in 1442, of course, this is, full steam ahead with the Reconquista. Pope Eugene IV signed the papal bull Ilias Q, right? Which authorized the Portuguese military order, the Order of Mary and Christ, to begin raids on the west coast of Africa. And he literally called it a new crusade against the Moors. Yeah. These are the things, dear brother, These are the things. See, what the quote unquote Black man and woman in America are suffering from, in truth, is not so much of residuals from slavery. It's the persistent identity crisis.
Exactly.
That's the real issue there.
That's the real issue.
That's what got, see, that leads into, we were just talking about this earlier, what got Whoopi Goldberg in trouble. Because she put her finger on, got too close to the pulse. She goes, oh, that wasn't, between the Germans and Jews, that wasn't a racial issue. They're both white. Woo, woo, and that's what got her in trouble.
Hence, what you guys were talking about before I came on.
Yes.
Charles touches on this in the racial contract. Kudos to him for doing this. This packaging of the Jewish Holocaust in Europe, which I don't deny it happened. Even I give them even the 6 million figure, right?
Right.
But the way that it is packaged is as a unique event in history, unlike any other that came before it and after it, which is not true.
Right.
Because the way that Charles puts it is that basically what the Holocaust, European Holocaust of the Jews represents, is basically what the European colonial powers were doing in Africa and elsewhere throughout the world, turned on itself.
That's a fact. That's a fact. We're just being right. We were just talking about this at the Berlin Conference in 1883, and then Leopold running rampant through Belgium or through Belgian the Congo, through the Congo. Yeah. Craziness.
And that's a great point, dear Sheikh Wahid and Grand Sheikh Sharif, is that basically we're taught all of this, we're taught this repetitive information in the American school system. And I've been through the American school system. And yes, it's all there. The atrocities happened, the 6 million Jews and all that stuff. We're not denying anything. But why aren't we taught about the 100 million Native Americans, the indigenous people here, what King Leopold did to the Africans, what the British did to the indigenous in New Zealand and Australia, what Winston Churchill did to the Asian Indians that starved 100 million of them to death because of the British policy? Why aren't we taught about all of these people? You know why? Because they're not white. So Whoopi is right in some way.
It's good that we've come to this point, because I want to mention the following. Disinformation has only been coming out in the last 20 years.
That's a fact.
During the First World War, the British, in their fight with the Ottomans, marched into Iran, took over all of the granaries throughout the country because the central government was weak. They couldn't resist these British troops. This is at the same time that Russia had fallen to the Bolshevik Revolution, so Russia was out of the war. They took over the granaries and basically refused a single grain to the Iranian population for a 2-year period. And these are based on U.S. State Department records. There is an estimated 8.5 to maybe 9 million Iranians perished between the years of 1917 and 1919. This information was suppressed until an Iranian scholar who lives in the East Coast of the United States, Mr. Mohammad Qoli Majd, went through the archives of the U.S. State Department for the period and uncovered this. There were rumors for years and years that something, this massive famine had happened in Iran during the First World War. No one had known about it. It then turns out that in 1921, the British orchestrated the coup d'etat of Reza Shah, the father of the former king of Iran, as a mechanism to cover up the crime that they had committed in the Iranian Holocaust of 1917 to 1919. So for over a 57, 58-year period when the Pahlavis were in power, a Western American-backed comprador regime, this information was systematically suppressed because that was the price for it coming to power in the first place. And this happened before the Nazi Holocaust, the Second World War.
Wow. See?
There's a book on this. There's a book on. I will send you a copy of it, a PDF copy of it.
This brings up a question in my mind. Right now, this aspect of critical race theory in America, why is there so much resistance all over the country where they don't want this taught in the schools? And I would love to hear both of your thoughts on this.
Because it touches too close to home, and because when you examine critical race theory, it is unassailable in what it presents. Like I said, let me reemphasize, when I say unassailable, I don't mean infallible. I mean, as a theory, it is, you cannot argue with it, right?
Right.
I have defied many of these conservative punditry on their pages on Facebook and elsewhere to come and debate with me on the fine points of the critical theory. Take your author, let's read the text, and then argue the points back and forth based on issues of history, based on issues of theory, based on issues of whatever you want.
Absolutely.
None of them are interested.
Nope.
They're not interested. So that means that critical race theory as a theory is a incredibly, threatening theory to the establishment. But by the same token, what you're also finding, and this is a mechanism that happens in these societies that we're living in, is that when an establishment sees something that it finds a threat, it attempts to infiltrate it and to appropriate it. But in my opinion, where critical race theory is concerned, this is a mistake they're making, because it is as if they're going to be swallowing the hemlock themselves.
Right.
So if they appropriate the critical theory because of what critical theory represents, they're going to fall. And this is very different from, say, for example, the gay stuff. It is very different from even the gender stuff to a lot of degree, because gender is shared across all races, right?
Right.
And even the issue of homosexuality is shared amongst all races.
Amongst all races, that's right.
But when it comes to the issue of race itself, right, given the historical record, given, and this evidence is unassailable, and given what imperialism and white imperialism has inflicted on this planet for the last, 500 years, and particularly given scholars are now coming and saying things like the environmental crisis that the planet is facing is as a consequence of the last 500 years of European colonialism and imperialism. This is a gun to their head.
It really is, dear brother. Then I'll refer to, in my answer or in my response, to James Reston and his book, James Reston Jr.'s book, The Dogs of God, right? Talking about the connection between Columbus and the defeat of the Moors, right? Anyway, he speaks of that time period, 1477, in 1478 when the Inquisition began, right up to 1492 when the defeat in the fall of Granada. That period of time for Euro-Christian Spain. And then I wanted also to I'll bring it up a little bit later. Euro-Christian Spain, that point in the Reconquista, man, they had the wind at their back. Yeah. So much so that they came up with the phrase that's now used by the alternative right and white supremacist groups today, Deus Vult, God wills it. Because they realized, they were like, this isn't happening because there's something else. This is bigger than us. And so when James Reston Jr. says that the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella uniting the kingdoms of Aragon and Castile to create the first modern nation state in the world, right? Said that the Euro-Christians at the time called it the second coming of Christ. And that our forefathers called it the end of the age. So what we're seeing in America today is that same sentiment in reverse.
Yes.
We're seeing the same sentiment in reverse. It's like, listen, everybody else is kind of sitting on their hands. It's kind of happening all by itself. And to your point, America, I did a lecture on racism for a group of professional educators. My last slide was this, and I showed statistics. Racism is economically and socially unsustainable.
Exactly.
The world can't sustain it. America definitely can't.
Well, we've had 500 years of one particular tribe of people on this planet plundering the resources which have plundered the environment in which humans being. So the ecosystem is now beginning a process of shutting down. And if we are not careful over the next 50 to 60 years, we will have an extinction event on that level. The level, for example, in which entire areas which were rich in all kinds of, minerals are now depleted. The level at which the oceans are being polluted, that is, killing massive amounts of aquatic life. The fact that the planet is warming up, and that is creating another layer to the extinction of biological species in the oceans and whatnot. This is a very serious thing. So white supremacy is a killer. It is killing you. And it's also killing white people. It's not just killing black and brown people throughout the world. It's also killing white people as well.
That's right.
It is in the interest of the tribes of Europe. I mean, this whole, I don't use white anymore because I think it's such a misnomer. But the tribes of Europe, who are scattered throughout the world, it is in their best interest to start considering that this paradigm needs to be unraveled. So, we ask for their solidarity. Do you want your children to live in peace? Do you want a better world for your children, for yourselves and their children? Then it behooves you to first of all take these poisons out of your own minds and hearts and join us.
Brother. Prophet Noble Ali said this about our people in America, called Negro, Black, Colored, African American, etc. He said, "Come rejoin the families of nations."
Exactly.
When we gave that up and accepted the false teaching in terms of identity, we left the human family.
Yeah.
One of the things I said during a debate a number of years ago to another brother who was defending using Black, I said, first of all, let's just define this in the scope of things. It's a caste system, and Black is one of the pillars that holds it up. And it's the permanent underclass.
Yes.
I said that means, and it supports white supremacy. That's what it does. I said, so if you call yourself white, it has nothing to do with whether you're a bad person or a mean person or it has nothing to do specifically with that. But if you identify as white, you're a white supremacist. If you identify as Black, you're a white supremacist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because these categories are the fictions created by it.
Yes.
So, but the one thing that they also need to realize is that they're being simultaneously victimized themselves by the very thing that they're upholding. Paulo Freire was awesome in kind of unpacking this whole dynamic in his book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where he says this, that the oppressor has to also simultaneously oppress him or herself in order to be the oppressor.
Has to. Back in 1946, the governor-elect of Georgia, his name was Talmadge. He, when asked on the Meet the Press radio show about the Negro problem, he openly said the Negro is living a 150-plus-year-old artificial history that prevents him from respect and recognition in American society. He was right. But what he failed to understand or failed to verbalize, that he had to do the same thing. They had to do the same thing to their own people as well.
Yes. Beginning with the women.
Beginning
with the women. Yeah.
Yes.
So, I think, we should start to reach out to our sisters amongst, the tribes of Europe, because as they're being empowered, they're also in a position to begin to basically to go for the jugular of the white male patriarchy that fuels the white supremacy. And, a lot of these gals, a lot of them surprise me from time to time because they get it, because they have been victimized on the levels that they have been victimized by the system and individuals. When they get it, they really come out, and that you're talking about real Valkyries here as warriors, real comrades. So I appeal to all the white women. I mean, I said this in another podcast with Salman some time ago. Yeah. When I define white supremacy, I define it as white male patriarchy. And sisters, white sisters can be on one side of the border of this or on the other side, but they're not literally defined by it, as it were. So that then also throws the arguments about we are racist or reverse racism, which is nonsense.
Right.
There is no such thing as reverse nonsense. So this is where I think, as a strategy, more when you that sister that you interviewed for your program, she was great. She was really good. I watched that whole thing.
Beautiful.
And that woman was great. More power to her. But we need more and more and more of these sisters to join our ranks. Yeah.
People need to see what you mentioned earlier and I mentioned earlier. They need to see, just have a little bit of foresight. If you love this country and you want to see it continue and prosper, they have to have enough clear-sightedness to go, wow, it's unsustainable going the way it is with this particular dynamic. Unsustainable. It's driving it into the ground. You know, McKinsey and Company, in a recent report they did, stated that by closing the racial wealth gap, we're just talking money, closing the racial wealth gap created by systemic racism, the GDP, the United States GDP, could be 4 to 6% higher by 2028. So, like in nominal dollars, you know, consumption, investment, cost the U.S. economy between 1 trillion and 1.5 trillion, you know, between now and 2028. That's roughly $2,900 to $3,400 per capita GDP.
Wow.
Effectively, racism is costing European Americans that much for every man, woman, and child. By missing out on that 4 to 6% growth, they're robbing themselves of money, job opportunities, promotions, and even a higher standard of living than they have right now.
100%. And let's just remind everybody that since the end of the Second World War, all of the wars of empire have been wars against people of color.
All of them. All of them.
So in essence, it is your children who are going overseas to die for white supremacy.
Yes.
You're losing your loved ones. You know,
yes.
Your futures are being robbed by white supremacy.
Yes.
The fact that you know you have the kind of inflationary cycles that you have in North America, the fact that you have, you know, that the so-called American dream is now more and more and more and more out of the reach of pretty much the entirety of the American middle class.
Yes.
To tell you that white supremacy is your enemy.
Yes,
right?
sir.
So and the military industrial surveillance media academic complex that undergirds all of this, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Is your enemy. So this needs to transform. If you want to live a better, more balanced life, you know, for yourselves and your children, their children's children, then you need to look at this.
You need to look at it and make no mistake. Like again, with proper, like, you know, with a proper historical narrative, right? Make no mistake, you know, the descendants of Africa and Islam has always played a major part in this, not necessarily, you know, in the way of identity politics.
Yeah.
In the way of identity politics. There's a book called The Devil's Bargain, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the White House, where it talks about Steve Bannon's education. And it was, you know, I'll quote from the book. It says, the Benedictine curriculum was traditional Western civilization presented in the context of Catholicism. Quote, we were all taught that Western civilization was saved 500 years ago in Spain when Ferdinand and Isabella defeated the Moors. The lesson was, here is where Muslims could have taken over the world. And here's where the great stand where they were stopped. We were taught a worldview. This is how we survived. I think that shaped all of us, but what Steve took away was a belief that you got to be willing to identify the threat.
But here's the things about, you know, I mean, these folks always seem to go back to the you know, the fall of Spain, to the Aragons and the House of Castile.
Right.
Is that the way that campaign succeeded was in the division of these various Moorish houses and dynasties. Right?
Absolutely.
So you had the Almohads and the Almovarids that went at each other for almost 300 years.
Yes.
And then in North Africa, the same thing was going on and on
yes.
and on. And it's because it was a process of attrition, right, that made the Moors in Spain and North Africa weak.
That's
and because
a fact.
of that, they collapsed. We see the same paradigm here. Identity politics, when you have the gay lesbian community fighting for its cause, when you have the African American community, Black Lives Matter, only on the Black Lives Matter cause.
Right.
On and on these go, then there's no solidarity and you never get anywhere and the system always win and it's at your expense. And for them, all of these causes become nothing more than entertainment to undergird and further bolster themselves.
There you go.
So this is where, you know, postmodernism as a theory, and another friend of mine, an Italian scholar named Gioda Preparata, wrote a great book I recommend people go out and read. It's called The Ideology of Tyranny, where he argues this in this book, that the whole purpose of postmodernism, despite all of its talk and rhetoric on being on the left, was a means by the establishments of Anglo-Europa to basically divide solidarity amongst the left, so lest they ever unite and overthrow the system.
Right.
Which nearly happened, by the way, in the 60s. We came this close to it. Yeah.
That's a fact. That's a fact. That's incredibly powerful.
But
Yes.
they didn't calculate on the fact that out of all of this would come something like critical race theory,
There you
which
go.
is the real poison to that.
Yes.
And that is why they don't know what to do. So they will infiltrate Black Lives Matter. They will pay off people in Black Lives Matter. They will create something here, create something there, demonize Black Lives Matter among certain segments of middle America, middle white America, and so on and so forth, create these frictions, like happened in Minneapolis, and on these examples go as a way to fuel this false dialectic, right?
There you go. Yes.
But the moment even the white middle class, or even not even the white middle class, the white proletariat, the white working class understands that they are being used as in a divide and conquer strategy by the very people that are victimizing them.
They're voting against their own interests. Oh, goodness.
Let's vote for Donald Trump, who's going to privatize our entire economy, send inflationary cycles through the roof, with no protections either legally or on the governmental level for us or anybody else in our lives. How insane is that?
Absolutely insane. Absolutely insane.
But we won't vote for Democrat. I mean, I despise the Democratic Party, but labeling the Democratic Party as socialist is, despite the fact that they're not socialist by any stretch of the
not even close, right?
Not even close. But to demonize them because maybe there's certain members like JOC and whatnot in Congress who may advocate for these talking points. But this demonization of socialism, the S word in America, right?
Yes.
People don't realize that in countries in Europe, like Germany that I was living in until 2019, and even here in Australia, you have a social safety net. So, basic healthcare is guaranteed by law. Education, up to a certain point, is free, right? Yes, you pay more taxes, right? But you also get better roads. You get better, healthcare. If you run out of money, or if you don't have, if you go destitute, you can always depend on some level of a government program.
Right.
Come and bail you out. And it's your money, your tax money that is made.
It's your tax money in action. There you go.
Yes.
That's right.
But in America, people are brainwashed to believe that this is a bad thing, and that government on that level that taxes the rich, or taxes that that you have a tax base that then creates a social welfare program, creates socialized medicine, creates public education, and that sort of thing is a bad thing. Is socialism. This is the way of the devil. This is what these people. The stupidity is just mind-boggling. How people can believe in this.
What the mainstream in America has been led to believe as normal goes right back to the beginning of this conversation. It is based on the caste system. It's based on that, and it's like you're desperately trying to revive something that's going the way of the dinosaur really fast.
Yeah.
Really fast. You've got new emerging, identifiers, ADOS, BIPOC, but the Moorish Science Symbol of America has been around since 1913 saying, don't call us Black. Don't call us African American. Don't call us we have a history like everybody else, and that also, it does a number of things simultaneously. It works to eliminate the otherness.
Yes.
It's like there was a particular model from Dominican Republic. Her name is Amara. Her entertainment name is Amara La Negra. Right. And so there was a segment on MTV where she was applying for this particular role, and the person that was judging was also Latino, Puerto Rican, I believe. And he says to her, "What's up with the Afro? Why you got the Afro?" She's like, "What are you talking about? I'm Afro-Latina. I'm Afro-Latina." "Yeah, but why are you trying to act Black?" "Oh, I'm Afro-Latina. I'm Afro-Latina." I was like, "Well, and I use that as a lesson to some of my members. I'm like, what if this was 500 years ago in Spain? Would she call herself Afro-Latina? Or would she call herself Latina? Because who controlled the social narrative at the time?
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying? So go ahead, brother.
But what's interesting, you put your finger on something extremely important. But see, also when artists and whatnot pick these monikers as self-identifiers, they're also buying into the narrative that the white supremacist has created in making people of color into the object of its ridicule. So the comedy.
Yes.
Right? And so since entertainment is about ridicule, it's about, it's make people laugh or make people lighthearted. These people take on these identities, perpetuating that narrative without even realizing what they're doing.
That's a fact. It's a fact. You have, and again, our people in America have grown up in such a unique condition. They've grown up absent old world connection, absent old world identity, absent. No other people can think in those terms. So we'll say things like, she's mixed Puerto Rican and Black. What in the world does that even mean? When there's Puerto Rican darker than her with more frizzier hair. You see? And so like we'll say things like Black Arabs or Black Mexicans or Black, and that's absolutely horrible. And it goes just right to your point of accepting the ridicule, accepting the otherness, accepting the otherness as if, we're set aside from the human family, but it's such a difficult thing for people who have only been given, the derogative term to identify with.
And so this goes to systems of representation, media, entertainment, but ultimately education, which is responsible or should be responsible for providing critical skills to people.
Come on.
Then why are they so bent out of shape on critical race theory?
There you go. Correct. Because, to quote another very wise man in very simple words, the truth will make you free.
So brothers and sisters in America, you ain't free.
Nah.
And the system doesn't want you to be free.
Brother, let me tell you, that's a fact. One of the things that came to me not too long ago about the great social experiment, which is America, the great crucible that's America, right? The great social experiment, the great social alchemical experiment, right? I would dare say we have not yet seen the end product of the experiment yet.
But the question is, does the experiment begin with the arrival of the white man, or was it initiated by the natives? And that's where, and that is something that I have wondered on for a very long time, because a lot of historians of the North American Native people know about the experiments of the Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy.
I live in the center of it. The city of Syracuse is the center of it. Yes, sir.
There you go. And these people had an experiment of democracy that even, took the attention of people like Benjamin Franklin and other of the so-called American founding fathers.
Yes.
So who are the real founding fathers of this American experiment? It certainly doesn't look like these white men who signed that document in Pennsylvania, in Philly.
That's right. It's so funny. We have an actual city of Philadelphia has an actual official city of Philadelphia holiday that was started by the Moorish Science Temple of America, Temple number 11. And it's called Moorish American Remembrance Day because October 14th, 1774, there was a meeting in downtown Philadelphia. And that is the day that we mark as, in America, there was the official denationalization of the descendants of Moroccans and born in America. Yeah.
It's interesting, my brother, you bring that up, because Obama one time when he went to Cairo, he said America was founded on Muslim law. And if you look at the banner of the Kingdom of Hawaii, 200 years before America even existed, and you look at their old banner, it's a picture of two Moors, dark-skinned Moors with a red fez, and they're holding up the banner of the Kingdom of Hawaii, meaning these Moors were master navigators of the sea. And that's why it's, even when you have a boat, it's called being moored at the
Yes, sir.
and these Moors were master navigators. They were going all around, and they're not giving due credit. And Hawaii is the only state in America to have an Islam Day official holiday. Most people don't even know there's a state that celebrates Islam every year as a national holiday.
Now, I want to touch on that too, because I'm sure you all, I'm sure you all will feel me on this. You know, the present, we're not, and this is for the listeners and the viewers. When we say Islam, we are not necessarily talking about what's portrayed to the West as Islam. You know, we're not talking about, you know, the product of the work of T.E. Lawrence of Arabia necessarily, you know, and especially when we're speaking even as late as just around 1940, the Saudi expression was not that strong. You know, it wasn't so prevalent until petrodollars got behind it.
And that's another white supremacist intrusion into Islam, with the British coming in and setting up these different Wahhabi groups to try to destroy Islam.
So we're talking about a time period where Islam looked a lot different and behaved a lot different than what the West is being shown, you know, is being shown today. And so that right there, you know, what you do, you know, is the thing. That 800 years of Islamic rule in Europe is the foundation for present Western civilization, and that's
100%. 100%. Without the Islamic presence, Europe would have never had the scientific revolution it had. It was because, you know, I mean, during most of the Middle Ages, most of the medieval period, the church considered much of these texts of scientific knowledge from the Greek and Roman periods to be the devil's knowledge.
Absolutely.
And this knowledge was preserved and refined and expanded and evolved in the Muslim world.
That's right.
It was then transmitted back into Europe via those channels.
That's a fact.
We are actually responsible for the scientific and technological revolution that the West likes to claim for itself.
Isn't that something? But you can't say that and claim supremacy at the same time. Can't do that. You know.
So now the conclusion is, on that very point that you just broke, that white supremacy has to perpetuate itself based on the rules about its own supremacy.
Oof.
So it doesn't, you know, white supremacy is actually not responsible for spawning its domination of the planet. Other people have it. I mean, you even see it today, you know, in most of the tech industries and government, in even intelligence and media. These are all packed by people of color, whether we're talking about Indians or whatnot. Yeah, the CEOs and the shareholders and whatnot, they're white families. But who's running the show?
Who's running the show? How about that? That's a fact. That is a fact. You know, again, the whole thing is, it's run its course. It's run its course. And if we're to see into, you know, to use a religious term, the hereafter, you know, it all depends on how we handle this issue right now. It depends on how we handle this issue right now. If not, then the worst is yet to come.
I don't think this beast is going to go down with a fight, but I think more of us are becoming more and more prepared for that fight, and we're going to knock this bitch out once it comes at us, you know, because, you know, enough is enough. This planet is dying. This is what people have to understand. The ecological crisis that this entire planet faces right now, and we're seeing this in the form of COVID-19, and that's just the beginning. That's the first shot across the bow. More is going to come.
Yes.
If we don't get our act collectively together soon, we are all going to die.
That's it. We call it, you know, Prophet Noble Drew Ali called it before that great and dreadful day, which is sure to come. He also, to your point, said that the European is going to have to look death in the face before he gives it up.
And
Yeah.
I think it's a great point that both sheikhs and teachers are making at this point for the audience that is listening, because right now we see all this hatred in America right now, and there's this impending chaos and civil war that is basically out there. And
Yeah.
you know, one of my great friends and brothers, Douglas Dietrich, what he says is, when you look out the window and you don't see people rioting and pillaging, then that means it's a good day. And
Yeah.
we are getting closer to that day. And we have to follow what the Holy Quran is teaching us when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we have divided you amongst nations and tribes so you may get to know one another. So
And not despise the other.
that's it.
Correct.
Well,
That's
where's
it.
the origin of that verse? You know, خلق الله إنسان على نفس الواحدة. God
Yeah.
created humanity upon one soul and then dispersed them into tribes and nations in order that they may know each other. So
That's
the point of origin is that single soul that we all are.
So that comes to my next question to
Yes.
both of you. How can the white woman basically help us in this fight against this global white hegemony?
Oh, wow. The one interview that I did with my friend Elizabeth Higgs, I think the brother was referring to. Woo! I mean, she's already there. And you have a lot of European women, more and more and more, becoming involved with diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
I think that is a good field, or is at least a good place to meet them. I believe that's
Yes.
a good place to meet them. It's right there on DEI platforms. We put together a DEI platform that's pretty gutsy. It's based on what we've been talking about. That DEI platform is what we call race nonconformity. If I can, in America today, decide, you know what? My name's not Sharif, my name is Sharifa, and call me a she, and you got to respect my pronouns, right? In the workplace. Then I should have no problem saying, don't refer to me as African American or Black or Negro, or don't refer to me as that.
That's
I
it.
have an origin, just like everybody else in America, with a history and a culture that's attached. You see?
Mhm.
And so there's gender nonconformity, we can have race nonconformity. You see? And just like during the end of the 15th century, you know, with the Islamic Empire, the Moorish Empire breaking up and dividing and fighting amongst each other, there were also members of our forefathers that aided and assisted Euro-Christian Spain, right? Why is that important? Even though we were falling apart, we still controlled the narrative. So we have to be able to heavily impact the status quo to cause the change. And I think that that's a good way to go, at it. And I believe dealing with the European woman in this respect is a good approach as well.
Definitely.
100%. I agree. 100%. I mean, Roya of blessed memory, you know, was a white German woman. She had, you know, half Iranian blood in her, but she was German. She was white German.
Mm-hmm.
And this woman, God rest her soul, was a Valkyrie and lioness like none other. I mean, unfortunately, in the end, it cost her life because we were targeted by these Nazis in Berlin. But, you know, the white woman, when she gets it, she gets it. And this friend of yours, this Elizabeth,
yes.
In Indiana, she is a gem of a person. I would love to talk to her. I mean, I would tell her, you know, go out and start recruiting your sisters.
Yeah.
You know, the future is literally in your hands. It is in the hands of women, and especially white women like her.
Right.
So go for it, girl. You know, you go, girl. You just go and talk to your other sisters, bring them, create groups amongst each other, and then once you guys have organized yourself, then, you know, get in touch with us. And
there you go. There you go.
Organizations like us. And let's see how we can, you know, make this boulder roll faster down the proverbial mountain.
There you go.
The thing with critical race theory is that critical race theory is a nuclear bomb, a discursive nuclear bomb.
Yes.
And this is why they are, the right, the far right is hell bent on discrediting it. And they're being very honest about it.
Yes.
But, we have to discredit. But the liberal, the white liberal, the one that Malcolm X warned about more than any other, those are the cats that we got to be careful of. Why?
That's the ones.
Because they want to appropriate this in terms of wanting to corrupt it. But my opinion is that they won't be able to. Because they won't be able to disfigure the theory. They will have to face the theory and deal with it.
To your point, brother, we did a presentation to a very, she's got a huge heart, love her to death. She's a European sociologist and anthropologist, and she's a professor at Syracuse University. She was looking to help us get published for our diversity platform. And when we were presenting to her, the fear, like, oh my goodness. You know what she said? There's like knee-jerk reaction. But we can't totally get rid of race classification. I said, why? She goes, because how are we going to measure racism without it?
And so that's a problem. So it's a vicious cycle. See?
Right.
The Arubra's swallowing its own tail. So we want to cut this snake in half.
That's right. She was basically saying, no, we need it so we can monitor it. How about we get rid of it so we don't need it?
But getting rid of it does not mean being colorblind either, because that is also whitewashing. So, we have to, we got to get really creative with all of this. And this is what these folks writing critical race theory are actually doing.
Yes.
That's why I get really peeved at some brothers and sisters, like my dear friend, Idris Samawi Hamid, who poo-poo critical race theory and their philosophy professor without actually sitting and reading these texts and dealing with it on their own terms.
Right.
No one is saying that this stuff is foolproof, it's infallible, that it's scripture from heaven. No. It is a theory, but it is a very powerful theory, and it is potentially the poison to the system. If it swallows it, will kill it.
If for no other reason, it dares to psychoanalyze what is masquerading as normal.
Exactly.
Yeah. If for no other reason.
This is absolutely beautiful, because myself being of the Fatimiyya Sufi order and Sheikh Wahid Azal being my Sheikh and Murshid, I'm so happy that this is an example of unity, my brothers, that we are exemplifying tonight with the Moorish science and Sufi science coming together in one platform, because it was the Moors and the Sufis collectively who brought the Europeans from darkness to light. So it's us coming back together again with the blessings and will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm just so honored to be here with both of you.
We're taught, right? The Arabic, of course, Qul huwallahu ahad, right? Doesn't mean that there's one God.
Yes.
It means Allah is one.
Yes.
Meaning the indivisible unity. So there is no duality. There's polarity, right, that expresses as duality, but there is no duality. All is one.
Mm-hmm.
Or another way of putting it, there's no dualism, but there is a dualitude.
Yes.
And dualitude is very different than duality or dualism.
Yes.
Because ultimately, there's only one thing in control of the whole plot.
That's right. Correct. And so with us, like, we'll say, what is our religion? Islamism, right? We say ism to denote a purposeful, active direction towards the resolution of opposites. To us, that is it. Islam is heaven. It's the state of, it is the perfect state of being. So our religion is a pursuit in that direction. There's a lot, I think, that what Prophet Ali taught us that's very, very close and congruent with Sufi practice and Sufi thought.
Brother Sharif, that brings me to my next question. If Prophet Noble Drew Ali was alive today, how would he address the critical race theory situation, and what would he advise, not just the Moors, but humanity as a whole, on how to tackle this issue and stand against those that are resisting against it? What would he do?
He was born in January 8th, 1886. That would make him a Capricorn, right?
Mhm.
So straightforward and biting, basically. You know, as a matter of fact, I'll quote, he said, according to all true and divine records of the human family, there is no Negro, Black, or colored race, or attached to the human race. These things don't exist, you know? And so with him, he would say, listen, let's start with the truth. Let's go from what's known to the unknown. What's known is that those terms are improper to refer to human beings by.
Indeed.
That's it. Then he'd be very, I believe, well, here's another thing. He said back in 1928, when in terms of numbers, the organization was huge. He said in the year 2000, the Moors are coming to their own.
Mm.
He also said the third and fourth generation will see basically he said the work he did in 1928 was to more fully manifest in a future time. I would argue and say, I would say arguably maybe that his teaching back in 1928 is more relevant today.
Definitely.
More relevant today. You know, when we can say, wait a minute, when we can look and talk about what we're talking about now, critical race theory, the fact that the color-coded race classification system is a caste system. And then you say, well, wait a minute, Noble Drew Ali was teaching in 1913 that these things don't exist. That Black and white people don't exist the way we say them to exist. You see, and that those are marks, especially Black, because you can't have a superior without an inferior. You
Definitely.
can't. And so for our people, before we can point at superior, we need to clean up ourselves.
100%.
So we stop not just calling ourselves by inferior names, but behaving like the names indicate.
Mm-hmm.
We give up the names and the principles that delude to slavery.
Indeed.
That shakes the foundation of white supremacy.
And that's beautiful, my brother. And now I would like to ask my Murshid and Sheikh Wahid Azal, that if the Bab and Subi Azal faced critical race theory today, how would they address us on how to tackle this beast?
The first thing I would say, I would go back to the question that you asked Sharif Anael. I would say that Prophet Noble Drew Ali is actually alive today. He's living in the heart of Sharif Anael and speaking through his mouth today. So Prophet Noble Drew Ali is alive. And the Bab and Sopa Azal are alive, and they speak through me in this day. And they are saying exactly what we're saying, that they are on board 100%. Again, it is not an infallible theory. It's not scripture from heaven. It is just a theory, but it's a theory that is descriptive of the times and the phenomena of the times and the layers in which we need to understand in order to untangle the problems that confront us.
Prophet Noble Drew Ali said, part of the mission of the organization to propagate the faith of Muhammad and extend the learning and truth of the great prophet of Ali in North America, right? And so we interpret that to mean make it relevant for the present time, right? And so I'm my leadership, Brother R. Jones Bay, and then other leaders and elders that we stand on the shoulders of, they make it easy for brothers like myself and some of my contemporaries. They make it easy for us to do this because they've given us an example. So you're right, dear brother. The prophet is still on the scene. As long as we imitate the example, he's still on the scene, and again, my leadership at R. Jones Bay is, powerful because he strives to live the life, He strives to live the life. His whole thing is practice, practice, practice. If you're not practicing it, then the words in the pamphlet or the words in the book or the words in the Quran are just words. Yeah. The real lesson is when you put it to practice, the result you get is the lesson.
One of my favorite verses in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we shall show them our signs in the horizons and in themselves. Until it becomes manifest to them that it is the real truth. So it's not just a book. The book is a mirror. So
Yes.
seeking the signs of Allah subhanahu is out there and also within yourself. So that these two are in a sense mirroring each other. So your struggle in yourself to refine yourself and make yourself a better human being is then mirroring outside of you in things that are going on. So God mirrors you from within and from within simultaneously. And I think that verse in the Quran is an extremely, extremely powerful formula, because people, I mean, most practitioners, they'll say, well, this is all a book. It's just scripture. You know, we have no evidence whether it's true or not. We just believe in it. Well,
yes.
But the Quran is saying, sure, but seek the Quran of the horizons and the Quran of yourself.
That's huge. Wow. This see, like, right, you know, even this social issue, you know, has, you know, the solution to it is spiritual.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
No, the solution is really spiritual, but not, you know, not in the Western idea of spiritual, which is spooky, you know, spiritual, but spiritual, how spiritual matters impinge upon real events, you know, and those who are seeking that, those are the believers.
Yes.
Those are the believers, you know, that the inner reality projects into the outer manifestation.
Which is actually Quran's own definition of faith, of Iman. The Quran's definition of Iman, I said this to someone the other day on Facebook, is based on two pillars. One is itqan, meaning perfection, and the other one is yaqeen, meaning certitude, or iqan.
Wow.
So perfection and certitude are the two pillars upon which true faith rests. Which, in other words, in the teachings of the Imams, peace be upon them, it means ma'rifah, which means gnosis or noetic knowledge. So seeing things as they truly are. There's a prayer by the Prophet, peace be upon him, it says, Allahumma arna haqa'iq al-ashya kama hiya. Oh Lord, show us the reality of things as they truly are. And a Muslim, by that definition, is living that reality on a constant basis, in that they are seeing these realities in the horizons and within their souls.
We have a saying, you know, Noble Drew Ali, Prophet Noble Drew Ali, you know, asked, you know, what, you know, understanding was, said that's the rock upon which man builds himself. It is the gnosis of the art and the naught.
There you go.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Wow.
Which in another way of looking at it is realizing within yourself the words of the tahleel, the la ilaha illallah, there's no God but God. Two phrases. There's a negative phrase, la ilaha, there's no God, and illallah, other than God. So in this dialectic of the world within the horizons of ourselves, we get to realize what the meaning of the tahleel is in our own individual lives. And so these struggles that we are engaged in to perfect the world and perfect ourselves in the process is actually us in the process of realizing the meaning of the tahleel for ourselves, of the la ilaha illallah. At every moment.
Powerful. This was an incredible conversation.
I loved it. It's truly an honor and privilege to bring Moorish science and our Sufi tariqah together, and which basically comes to my conclusion. Are there any concluding thoughts that both sheikhs would like to give? Something that I have not asked on critical race theory, and please take your time.
I just wanted to say that once again, I'm honored to be a part of the conversation. I'm honored to be in the presence of both of you. I'm honored to be to contribute in the great struggle for truth. You know, I'm honored. We're really in a real world conflict. You know, and it's very real. And, you know, we all have work on ourselves. I have a lot of work on myself to do, you know, but I want to be, you know, the best reflection of Allah and the prophets and the best reflection of truth to demonstrate in the darkest of dark, truth stands unopposed. So thank you all, brothers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brother Sharif. And my Sheikh.
Well, the first thing I will say is that the Moors have a home with us wherever we may be at any time.
Beautiful. Likewise.
So, mi casa, su casa.
Yes, sir.
Inshallah, one day you can make it down under. I'd like to show you actually Australia, some of these Aboriginal sacred sites. That's a whole other conversation, but I think everyone ought to see Uluru Katajuta, the Ayers Rock. That place is amazing. So if you ever come down here, I will take you there.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
And we will go see that place together.
Yes, sir. Wow.
Thank you, everyone, and Nur alaikum to Sheikh Wahid Azal, Islam to Grand Sheikh Sharif Bey, and assalamu alaikum to all brothers and sisters watching all over the world. Please take heed to what these two great teachers and leaders have taught us in this conversation, and this beautiful blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring both of them together, because everything happens with His will. And I'm glad that tonight His will was manifested through my Sheikh Wahid Azal, and my friend and brother, Grand Sheikh from the Moorish Science Temple of America, is that we need to stick together and we need to take this enemy head on, doing what we're doing. Just keep doing what you're doing and be relentless. Just like Prophet Noble Drew Ali, if he was alive, he would just keep going for the jugular. And that's exactly what it is. We have to just keep up our struggle against this enemy. And as time goes on, I believe everything will come in its full divine circle. And justice is prevailed. So again, everyone, thank you. Please support the Moorish Science Temple of America, Brother Sharif Bey, and please support the Fatimiyya. And until next time, thank you.
Yes, sir.